This morning we're going to conclude our journey through what is the first part of the book of Daniel in the series titled Daniel Living Faithfully in a Hostile World. And we end the series with a story that is really kind of the signature event of Daniel's life, the story that many of us learned as children in church and Sunday school, that unforgettable account of Daniel in the lion's den. Throughout this series, what we've been doing is asking the question, how does a person remain faithful to the one true God in a culture that insists that all gods are equal, all religions, all moralities are equally valid? How do we stay faithful in a world like that? And once again, today's passage addresses this challenge directly, showing us what courage and conviction look like in a pluralistic world that we live in. And by the way, there are some other interesting and quite frankly riveting stories that we skipped over simply because I wanted to stay focused on the theme of living faithfully in a hostile world. But you might want to read these stories when you get a chance. Daniel chapter 4 and chapter 5, they're fascinating stories. Like in chapter 4, the story of when Nebuchadnezzar, we spoke about him a couple of weeks, the king of Babylon, became so filled with pride. He built these massive things. He built if you're familiar with the 7 wonders of the ancient world, one of those wonders of the ancient world were the hanging gardens that he built in Babylon for his wife. Beautiful. I mean, it's amazing construction. He did that, and so one day he's walking around thinking, look at this great Babylon that I have built. And he had a dream, another dream that Daniel interpreted for him, and basically it was a dream in which God said he was going to judge him, and he did. Because of his pride, God drove him away from this palace and this great kingdom that he had built, and he drove him out into the wilderness where he lived like an animal. He lived like an animal, eating grass, his hands and feet getting wet with the dew of the field. It's an amazing story until he recognized his sin. And then in chapter 5 there's a story. This is all just extra, okay? This is not part of the sermon. In chapter 5 there's a story of one of King Nebuchadnezzar's successors. His name was Belshazzar, who also became filled with pride. They had a great party. They were drinking. They were getting drunk. They brought some of the golden chalices that they had brought from when they invaded Judah way back, and they were drinking out of them. These were sacred, right? And so because of that, God judged him, and he saw in the midst of this party a large human hand. Can you imagine a hand appearing here, just a human hand, and with the finger writing on the wall a message of judgment because of his pride? And so that day he died, the king died. Fascinating stories. Read them when you get a chance. But back to our topic and our theme, as we've seen throughout this series, and this story almost serves as a summary of everything we've learned today. Daniel was not hiding from the culture around him. He was serving at the very heart of the culture. He had a position of influence in the government, high up in the government of Babylon. And by the time we reach this chapter, though, things have changed. Because now Babylon has fallen. Babylon has been conquered. Just like Babylon conquered Judah and brought these Jews over to Babylon. Now Babylon has been conquered by the Persians. The empire has shifted. And so now Daniel is serving under the Medo-Persian rulers. So with the rise of a new empire comes a new king, and his name was Darius. And yet, with a new king, a new empire, Daniel's reputation was still so strong, his character so compelling, that this new administration wanted to keep him, and not only wanted to keep him, but they planned to elevate him, to promote him even higher. So let's read the story in Daniel 6. If you'll turn in your Bibles to Daniel 6. We're going to read, first of all, verses 1 through 5. So everybody follow along in your Bibles. If you don't have one, look at maybe somebody next to you has a Bible. Daniel 6, 1 through 5 reads like this. It pleased Darius, this is the king now. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. Now, look up here for a second. This is a new king, right? He's establishing his kingdom. So he decides, I'm going to have 120 satraps. I'm going to have 3 administrators over them, which means they will, have 40 satraps to look over. So verse 2 again, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. That's an important phrase right there. So that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Now he's going to take Daniel. He's one of the top 3. He's going to put him over the other 2. Right? So at this, verse 4, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel and his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. One day in January 1986, it was a cold day. My wife and I went to Walmart to buy a few things. We were still relatively new in San Angelo, having moved here only 4 months earlier. When we walked into Walmart that day, we noticed a group of people that were gathered around a TV and were watching something with great interest and great concern. So when we walked up, we saw a video feed that showed a huge cloud of smoke in the sky, and we discovered that that was a result of the explosion of the space shuttle Challenger, which had exploded just a few minutes prior to the time we walked up at 73 seconds after liftoff. Many of you remember the story. If you don't, you've read about this. The morning of the launch was cold, and engineers had warned that the O-rings and the boosters were vulnerable to cold temperatures, but apparently the pressure to launch overshadowed those concerns. And so it took off, and from the ground, everything looked great. From the ground, it looked successful, a normal countdown, a normal liftoff. But within 73 seconds, the shuttle disintegrated because of those unseen O-rings that failed under pressure. Small weaknesses matter. Small cracks matter. You can't ignore them. And you can't ignore cracks in character, in our character. Daniel's life had no cracks. So when the pressure came, nothing failed. He dealt with a lot of pressure, as we're going to see today in this story, but nothing failed. And his story here in Daniel 6 shows us what a lifetime of faithfulness looks like. It's believed that he was about 80 years old, no longer a young man, about 80 years old. He had been young when they brought him over from Judah to Babylon. Now he's an older man. But in this stage of life, it was a lifetime of faithfulness that allowed him to remain a man of integrity when he faced pressure. So how did Daniel handle opposition in his life? I want to just draw some principles that we can apply in our lives that will work in your life and in mine today. Here's the first one. He faced opposition. So when opposition comes, let integrity and diligence mark your life. We learn from Daniel that when opposition comes, let integrity and diligence mark your life. Look at verse 3. Look at Daniel 6:3. It tells us that Daniel distinguished himself. That means he set himself apart. That means he stood out. He distinguished himself. He didn't stand out because he was younger. He was no longer young. He didn't stand out because he was stronger. Probably wasn't as strong as he was certainly when he was younger. He didn't stand out because he was louder or because he was more charismatic. He stood out because he lived with integrity. With integrity. Think about that. Daniel was serving in a system that was riddled with bribes, with kickbacks, with shady deals, and yet he stood apart. He never assimilated to that. He was trustworthy. He was clean. He was above reproach. He was incorruptible. In a culture where compromise was normal, he refused to compromise. He refused to bend. He was incorruptible. And then verse 4 tells us that he wasn't negligent. In other words, he was disciplined at what he did. He was conscientious. He was dependable. He was trustworthy. His enemies couldn't accuse him of being lazy. They couldn't accuse him of corruption. They couldn't accuse him of not being capable because he worked hard and he was diligent. They couldn't accuse him of being lazy. But here's the point. Sometimes honesty and hard work alone don't make someone effective. What set Daniel apart was what the text calls his exceptional qualities. His exceptional qualities. Literally, this means a spirit of excellence. And I think that's a model for us as believers in the workplace, at your job, in your responsibilities. Be honest. Be hardworking. Pursue excellence. That combination is a recipe for influence and for credibility. I mean, sure, at your job, if you're honest, you're a man of integrity, you're a woman of integrity, you work hard, you're diligent. The dishonest and lazy workers might resent you. Anybody ever face that? But your leaders will notice, and most importantly, God will notice, and God will be honored. And so I see that Daniel's role in government here is a great illustration of what the prophet Jeremiah told the exiles when they first got to Babylon. Remember what we studied 6 weeks ago when we started this series? When the first wave of Jews was carried into captivity, their instinct was to withdraw. They set up camps outside the city. They determined to build just their own enclave so they wouldn't lose their identity as God's people. Their logic was this: to avoid assimilating, we must separate. To avoid assimilation, we must stay separate. But Jeremiah, speaking for God, wrote to them with a radically different message, and he told them, you must neither assimilate nor separate, but you must learn to integrate as you insulate your hearts. In other words, he said, don't lose your distinction, but don't retreat from the city either. He told them, engage, contribute, seek the welfare of the city. Seek the welfare of the place where God has sent you. So we talked about this, like I said, 6 weeks ago, but I want to look at this again because I think this is so important. First of all, Jeremiah told them, move in and engage with the cultural and economic life of the city. Engage with the culture. Don't rail against the culture. Engage with it without losing your distinctiveness while you insulate your heart. Engage with the economic life of the city. Don't retreat to the margins. And guess what? That's exactly what Daniel did. He didn't just survive in Babylon. Look at his story. He thrived. He's still thriving. He rose to the very top of the government, the very top of the power structure in a pagan empire, in a pagan government. And then Jeremiah secondly said to the Hebrews, keep your spiritual identity as God's people. Don't assimilate. Don't separate, but don't assimilate either. And again, Daniel lived this out. He lived it out. He never assimilated. He never became like everybody else. That's why his jealous colleagues admitted in verse 5. Look again at verse 5. They admitted, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. In other words, it's like his whole life is, focused around the law of his God. Everybody knew where he stood. Later in the story, we're told that 3 times a day Daniel would open his window and would pray to the Lord. He would pray toward Jerusalem. So he'd open his window so that everybody saw. His faith wasn't just a performance. It was something that was woven into the very fabric of his life. And then thirdly, Jeremiah's message was work for the peace and prosperity of the city. This is so important. Work for the peace and prosperity of the city. Did you notice, I told you to notice the end of verse 2, that because of Daniel's leadership, the king did not suffer loss. Did not suffer loss. In other words, Daniel wasn't working for his own advancement. He was working for the interest of the king. The king's interest didn't suffer loss. He wasn't working for his own tribe, only for his people. He loved his people. He was a Jew. He loved his people. But he was working for the advancement of the king and the advancement of the kingdom and of the city. He was laboring for the good of the city. He was working for the flourishing of a secular kingdom. His excellence blessed everybody around him. And that's exactly what Jeremiah had said. Work for the peace and prosperity of the city. Oh, what great lessons we can draw for our lives from his example. When opposition comes, let integrity and diligence mark your life. Do your work. Finish your work. Keep your promises. Treat people with dignity. Be someone who's dependable, who's trustworthy. People around you can trust you. Tend to your spiritual life so that you don't drift into negligence at your job. So you don't start cutting corners. Those of you that are in school, so you don't start cutting corners and showing up to school without your homework finished. That's a bad example. That's a bad habit to get into. Faithfulness in the small, unseen moments is what prepared Daniel for the big crises that he faced. Nobody becomes faithful in that lion's den who hasn't been already faithful in the prayer room. So let integrity mark your life, and let hard work and diligence mark your life. Secondly, we can learn from Daniel's story that when opposition comes, we must stay calm and trust God. We must stay calm and trust God. Because we're going to see here that Daniel was unshaken by the opposition he faced. This was serious opposition, right? He's going to end up in the lion's den. But he was unfazed. He was unshaken. Why is that? You know that rejection of believers by the world is to a large degree unavoidable. It's going to happen. And we see this clearly in Daniel's story. Look at what his jealous co-workers did in verses 6 through 9. Let's continue the story, verses 6 through 9. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce a decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed." So King Darius put the decree in writing. Wow, so these men went to the king. They said, "Make this law. Nobody can pray to any god or any person but you." The king says, "Oh, me? Wow, I like that." I mean, who doesn't like that, right? Who doesn't like to be the center of attention and have all the attention? And in this case, you know, the Medo-Persian kings weren't given to considering themselves to be deity like the Caesars were much later on. They considered themselves to be gods. The Medo-Persian kings weren't, but, you know, it feels good when people say something like this, like, for 30 days, and you're like, you know, that's not a bad idea. So he agreed to it. He put the decree in writing, and the trap was set for Daniel. And this experience, I think, is a good example of what history has taught us again and again, that there has always been tension, sometimes outright hostility between believers and unbelievers. in modern days we would say today, between those inside the church and those outside the church. For years, for centuries, believers and non-believers have lived in that uneasy relationship. And when people try to explain it, I've noticed that both sides tend to give simplistic and self-serving answers. For example, on the inside, Christians often say, well, the reason there's tension is because we're being persecuted. We're like Daniel, and the world can't live up to us, so they hate us. But let's be honest. Most Christians aren't anything like Daniel. Incorruptible, faithful, diligent. Most of us aren't nearly that consistent. So I don't think you can explain that hostility by saying, well, we're just too good, and that's why they don't like us. I mean, I hear that argument. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. Now, people outside the church often give their own explanation, simple explanation for the tension, their own self-serving explanation. They say, well, Christians are just hypocrites. They're narrow-minded. That's why we don't like them. But let's be clear. I mean, just like most Christians aren't exactly like Daniel-level saints, neither are they fake Christians who purposely are trying to deceive. We're people just trying to serve God. The vast majority of believers are not self-serving hypocrites. But what we see in Daniel, though, so this is an ongoing tension, but what we see in Daniel is a lot more interesting and maybe honestly a little more concerning because of the way that the trap was set and the possibility that this happens. How did this hostility toward Daniel grow? I mean, what even triggered it? Well, the trigger shows up in verse 4. Look at verse 4. At this, the administrators and satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel. Now, what's the at this? What's that referring to? At this is the king's plan to promote Daniel. The king planned to promote Daniel, and suddenly, these three administrators who had been equal were about to become unequal, and one of them, Daniel, was going to be over the other two. At this, it's not hard to imagine professional jealousy. It was professional jealousy. They said among themselves, who does this outsider think he is? He's coming in and he's taking our jobs. He's not even from here. These Jews are taking good Babylonian jobs. Right? That's a sentiment that we've heard before. So their first move was to dig up dirt. To dig up dirt. And notice where they looked. They looked in the realm of government corruption. Right? If you want to find dirt, government, go to the government. That's what they're saying. That tells us something, though. That tells us that they assumed that Daniel was just like them. They thought, well, look at, he's climbing the ladder. He's ambitious. He must be cutting corners somewhere. He must be doing something corrupt for him to get to where he is. So that's where we're going to start looking. In other words, their hostility began with the assumption that Daniel was no different than they were. He was just another player in the corruption game. But they couldn't find anything. They looked. They couldn't find anything. They discovered Daniel wasn't like them at all. He was incorruptible. His record was sterling. No skeletons in the closet. And the more they realized he was different, the more resentful they became toward him. Now, here's the point. Their hostility wasn't totally irrational. I mean, this is what I want us to see. It wasn't totally irrational because to the world, we as Christians will always seem a little strange. This is unavoidable. In some ways, it's understandable. The world can't fully comprehend us when we're truly living for God. And we as Christians should not be thrown off by it. Daniel was unshaken by it. He didn't panic. He didn't lash out against them. And we as Christians should understand it comes with the territory. And I think the main reason that this happens, the main reason for the tension between Christians and non-Christians is that we as Christians, to them, are unpredictable. And I say that because we don't react to typical things in typical ways. Or at least we should, right? When we're insulted, we forgive. When we're wronged, we show mercy. When we're overlooked, We just keep serving. When we're given power, we use it to bless people. And that kind of response doesn't fit the categories of the world. It confuses people. It unsettles them. It angers them. And sometimes it provokes hostility. So Daniel knew what they were doing, and he wasn't surprised. He didn't panic. He didn't try to get ahead of the narrative and didn't try to gather allies to defend his reputation. He understood that that was something that maybe we forget. And that was this, that living faithfully for God in a hostile world sometimes means that accusations will come. Sometimes the most Christian thing you can do when you're facing opposition is stay calm and trust God. Stay calm and keep walking with God. And that takes us directly to the next and final principle here that I want to draw from this story. We're not actually going to get to the portion of the Daniel in the lion's den. I'm wanting to look at Daniel's approach to opposition here. And here's the third thing. When opposition comes, lean into your devotion to God. Lean into it. Lean into your dependence on God. This may be the most striking part of the story here. It's already a fascinating story, the way they were angry with him and they tried to dig up dirt and they went to the king and convinced him to pass this law. But look at this. Look at verses 10 and 11. Daniel 6:10. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. Of course, right after that, they went to the king and they said, wait, king, didn't you pass this law that nobody could pray to anybody but you? And king, yes, I passed it and it's unchangeable. And they said, well, Daniel, who you think so highly of, is disobeying your decree. And of course, the king was heartbroken because he knew what that meant. And he didn't want to have to do this, but the law had been published and it couldn't be undone. But when Daniel learned the decree had been signed, he didn't react with outrage. He didn't react with fear. He went home, he opened his windows toward Jerusalem, and he prayed just as he always had done before. But the text adds a detail we can't overlook, and that is that he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to God. Giving thanks to God? Really? Even when with his enemies plotting against him, even with the very real threat of lions waiting for him, even when his future looked uncertain, what's going to happen here? He gave thanks to God. Before he saw an answer, before he saw a deliverance, because his thanksgiving, his gratitude wasn't based on results. It was based on the character of God. Because his gratitude wasn't based on circumstances. It wasn't tied to outcomes. It was anchored in God's character. So he was able to thank God because he knew that God was still in control. Nothing had changed between God and Daniel at that point. Nothing had changed. This is before the rescue, before the angel, before the king's change of heart at the end. He knew that God was still in control. This is a kind of gratitude that is a declaration of faith. When you say, God, you are good. But even when life is not, you're still good. You are worthy even when I'm under pressure, when I'm facing opposition or persecution. So he gave thanks. But secondly, verse 11 tells us that he also asked God for help. These men went as a group, they found Daniel praying and asking God for help. How do you think he was asking? You think he was asking like in desperation? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think he just knew that he needed God's help in that situation. He didn't pretend to be strong enough on his own. He didn't try to handle the opposition on his own strength or in his own strength. He asked God for what he needed. He asked God for help. He might have asked God for wisdom. He might have asked God for courage, for protection, certainly for God's intervention. And I think the way he responded shows us how we pray under pressure. How do you pray under pressure? You know what we want to do? We want to, and this is okay, we want to tell people, hey, I need you to pray. Pray hard. Everybody, pray hard. And I'm like, okay, I'm not sure what praying hard means, but I'm going to pray hard. And I get that. It's desperation. When we're facing hostility, we're facing pressure, opposition. Either we lean into desperation without thanksgiving. And then there may be the super spiritual ones who say, well, I'm not even going to admit that I have a problem. I'm not going to declare this, make a negative confession. So they just offer thanksgiving to God without acknowledging they need God's help. And Daniel held both together. He prayed without desperation with thanksgiving, but he also didn't ignore that he needed God's help. Both are important. Gratitude keeps your heart anchored. Gratitude keeps your heart anchored, but petition keeps your heart honest before God. And so Daniel prayed. He did what he always did. I love that. He did what he had always done. His compass pointed toward God. His habits were shaped, the prayer habits were shaped decades before this law was passed. This law wasn't going to change anything about Daniel. His spiritual disciplines were in place. So when the decree arrived, he didn't need to adjust his life. His devotion was already fixed. His dependence on God was already set. Do you know what Daniel could have done? He could have changed the way he prayed. He could have changed where he prayed. He could have prayed in the corner of the room instead of opening the windows toward Jerusalem like he always did. He could have prayed 3 times a day in the corner. We would have said, okay, I get it. You don't want to go to, you don't want to be thrown into the den of lions. You know what he could have done? He could have waited 30 days. I mean, this is a 30-day decree, right? He could have said, okay, I'll wait 30 days. And then on the 31st day, open the windows again and pray so everybody sees you. He could have done any of those things. But devotion mattered to him more than his own safety. And when we didn't get to read this part of the story, but when he's lured into the den of lions, no protest, no bitterness, no angry speech, no calling down judgment. And when the king came back the next morning, the king didn't sleep that night. He was so upset over being tricked, and because he appreciated and respected Daniel. And when he came back the next day, and he said, Daniel, was your king whom you served so faithfully able to deliver you? Daniel spoke with honor to the king. May the king live forever. My God sent his angel. Even in the lion's den, he had more peace than the king did the night in his palace when he was unable to sleep. So give God thanks when you're under pressure. When you're facing the kind of pressure, give God thanks, because thanksgiving redirects our thoughts from the threat to God who holds us in his hands. Ask God for help without apology. Strong Christians aren't those who never need help. They're those who ask for it constantly. I need your help. I need wisdom. I need courage. I need intervention. And this is so important. Let me suggest this to you. Build a prayer life. Build a prayer life before the crisis comes. Build it before the crisis comes. Daniel didn't start praying when the decree was signed. He kept praying the way he had always prayed. The habit was there. The prayer life was there. And a lot of times we don't take the time and the devotion and the discipline to build a prayer life. We build a prayer list. We have a prayer list, but we don't have a prayer life. Daniel had a prayer life. Build a prayer life before the crisis comes. Because in a hostile world, devotion isn't optional. Devotion is crucial. In a hostile world, devotion isn't optional. Devotion is survival. We need that. So we've spent these 5 weeks walking with Daniel and his friends through a hostile world. We've seen them resist assimilation. We've seen them stand firm under pressure. We've seen them speak truth to power, like Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego did. We've seen them pray with discipline, interpret dreams with courage. Just remain faithful through threats, through flames, and now lions. And today, as we look at Daniel standing faithful in the midst of lies, in the midst of pressure, in the midst of danger, I just want us to consider that maybe as you feel the weight of opposition in your own life today, that maybe you've been misunderstood. Maybe somebody has questioned your motives, has brought accusations against you which are false. Or maybe your struggle isn't with people. Your opposition isn't from people. Maybe your struggle is with circumstances that have pushed you to the edge. And they've made you wonder if God is still with you. You're feeling opposition from the struggles of life, from the hard knocks of life. And I think Daniel is teaching something very powerful here, that you don't have to fight every battle on your own. You fight by standing, by trusting, by praying, by staying faithful. When everything in you wants to give up, you find God's help in that way. So if you're here today and maybe you feel worn down, maybe you feel like your life has been shaken, your faith feels weak because you're under pressure, some kind of pressure from people, from finances, from a relationship. Or you've been tempted to pull back from devotion. You've been tempted to pull back from prayer, to pull back from trusting God. Today is your day. This moment is for you today. This moment is for you. You don't have to pretend to be strong. You don't have to hide the hurt. You can come to the God who shut the mouths of lions and protected Daniel. Bring him your fears. Bring him your wounds. Bring him your accusations, your anxieties. He'll meet you here. So today, we're going to pray, and we're going to worship God in song. But I also want to finish this series in this manner. I want to invite all of you. I'd like for all of us to come forward to seek God, to pray as Daniel prayed, with thanksgiving and with petition. Thanking God that He is God and that no matter what you're going through, He's in control. And to believe God for the miracle, but also to ask God for help. He asked Him. He didn't have to declare it and decree it. He asked God for help. He was asking God for help because He's above us and we look up to Him. So today you could do that. And I'm going to invite you to come. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, You've taught us so much in this series, so much that I hope our appetites have been whet. You've whetted our appetites even more to learn from Daniel and from the other stories. And Lord, I thank You that the lessons that we learned today, that we learned from the story of Daniel, are applicable to our lives even today. He lived so many years back, way, way, way back before us, and yet His example is our model for today. So Father, as we turn to You, I just pray for that man, that woman, that person who is facing some kind of opposition. And maybe it's something that keeps them up at night. They're worried. Maybe it's something in their family. Maybe it's a health issue. Maybe it's a financial concern. God, I pray that we would be able to respond to opposition the way that Daniel did, with integrity and with diligence, with trust and calm, and with devotion to You. Help us to do that today. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.